Hi, I'm Pete Holloway. I'm a Senior Vice President with Hazlett, Bird & Watson in Wheeling, where I'm a financial advisor. I'm also a certified financial planner. And as always, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to On Money. My guest today is Dominick Cerrone, a graduate of Lindsley. He got a degree in architecture from the University of Virginia with a minor in religious studies and also an engineering degree at WVU. Currently, he's the president of Cerrone & Associates, but more importantly for what we're talking about today, he's the owner of Good Mansion Wines. I want to thank you for being with us. Let's talk about Good Mansion, how to get started and how has it evolved? How old is it, by the way? How long have you been doing this?
Well, thank you first for having us on, Pete. I'm excited to talk about our story. We are on our, let me see here, we're on our 16th, going on our 17th year.
Congratulations.
We opened thank you. We opened in 2006. And how it got started is a funny story. And I've told it many times, and it's a random story, but it's a lot of times the way the kernel of any, successful business starts is just on a hunch. I had recently bought the LS Good Mansion, named after the Good family of the notoriety of the department store downtown that many of the older Wheelingites remember at this point.
Thank you.
We have to call ourselves older. But nonetheless, that was our family's homestead. It was called the LS Good Mansion, and it was a tour home for many years. And I had bought it, I really didn't have a specific purpose for it. It was in the neighborhood where I lived in East Wheeling, and I thought eventually that I could maybe successfully rent it out for office space. But after a year or so, a random conversation at a small dinner party about there not being a wine shop in town sparked my creativity, or put a spark in my head that perhaps you could really do a really interesting hybrid or a combination of a very beautiful venue with great product and create a whole sensory marketing and retail experience by having a wine shop in that in that building, the LS Good Mansion. And really that's its infancy. So that's how the idea started. And then that was a conversation, I think, in late 2005. And very carefully and methodically, and I think that was my engineering nature coming out, I did a thorough investigation of the whole wine retail climate in the state to understand what's called a three-tier system of having to buy wines from in-state wholesalers. In other words, we just can't go anywhere on the internet or reach out to Italy or to California or Australia directly. We have to buy from wholesalers that are in the state of West Virginia. And so I got very familiar with the players and the lists available. And what I very soon realized is that there was just such scant representation of all the wines that were potentially available in West Virginia, largely at that time being driven by the extensive demand of wines from the Greenbrier. They really were the tail that wagged the dog in wine retail years ago in terms of, you guys better carry these wines, we need these wines. And wholesalers really responded and had a beautiful portfolio, particularly a lot of European wines that had no presence at all in this part of the state. So I thought, first to market, this was a huge opening for us to really bring in a huge portfolio of wines that had a lot of international, that were based in long traditions of winemaking in the world, from legendary wine houses throughout the world that had no presence in Wheeling. And so that was kind of the whole premise of the shop, is really to bring the finest to Wheeling.
Now, are you able with these, because we were going to talk about working with, the wine industry and alcohol and so forth later on, but let's talk about it now. Are you able to go to the wholesalers and say, I have found this fabulous wine, will you start carrying it? Or they just turn their noses up and say, no? How does that work? Are you just shut out a certain...
A super pertinent question, and it's a very timely question and appropriate one, is that we'd have to say that we're one of the few retailers, and probably the primary retailer in the state, that does wag the tail that wags the dog, so to speak, in the sense that we have historically, starting in around 2010, we opened in 2006, but around 2010, we realized that there are a lot of portfolios. When we say that, we mean that the way that the wine industry works is that you've got importers for European wines or wines from outside the US. You have importers that import into the United States, and then they collaborate with all these various wholesalers throughout the country, because a lot of states are these three-tier states. And we realized that there's importer A, B, and C. There's these beautiful portfolios. And when we were abroad, we'd come across certain, wine contacts and, hey, we'd like to be carried in the US more. And we're dealing with this importer. Is there a way that you could sell us? And so we started realizing there's some importers that have beautiful portfolios that had no presence in West Virginia. So we successfully hooked, I think at this point, Pete, it's probably been about upwards of 8 or 10 importers up with in-state wholesalers to bring those to get them registered in the state and get those brought into the state. And that's not easy to do, in the sense that in order to get the attention of the wholesaler to do that, what's in it for them? Well, you have to do an order minimum, right? So we really put our necks out there and said, we'll buy this, we'll do this level of buying. And we've successfully done that in multiple instances. And to our credit, if we could boast a little bit, when you do look at current wholesale lists in the state, the whole amalgam of wholesale lists of wine in the state, there's a handsome percentage of those wines that are registered in West Virginia because of Good Mention wines. And we brought whole kinds of wines that had no representation, wines from geographies that wouldn't be possible to have gotten in West Virginia 5 or 8 years ago, are now available because of our efforts.
Well, that's one of the things that's going on, is that I know that you head off to Europe and you were able to visit these small wineries and come up with something and then bring them to the country, because, most of the wine that we think of, is transported around in tanker trucks almost. And you're able to get this really good stuff that maybe another place, a major department store couldn't carry, because they would use the entire output of that winery for a year.
That's a very important case to hit on, is targeting, and that is actually more true with regard to our selection of imported foods that we directly procure from Italy. We're dealing with, in the case of the imported foods, if we could kind of jump around for a second, is that we are dealing in a lot of instances with very coveted food producers. These are family food producers that are only maybe doing, 3,000 or 4,000 units of a product a year. They don't have that much land. They complete the whole chain of production, from growing it to bottling it, to shipping it to us. And therefore, that's not accessible to large retailers. In the world of wine, a little secret is that we actually don't visit directly a lot of wineries. We do occasionally. We do. And I need to clarify that when we go to Italy or France or Germany, we visit wine countries. Yes, we certainly go into the wine growing areas. We like going there a lot. But while we're there, we really don't focus on, we're not winemakers. We have very limited interest in understanding the technical aspects of the whole winemaking process, wine growing process. We observe it, we go to their vineyards, we drive around. But the most important interface and experience with wine is about being in those areas that have grown these vineyards for years to make these wines that are specifically part of their culture, their culinary culture. It's all about experiencing them at restaurants, basically. I mean, you need to have these wines with their traditional cuisines. And so we learn so much about wines by going to wine country and then dining, eating, whether it's at, small lunch trattorias or bistros or brasseries or whatever it is, or, finer restaurants in the evening. That's how you really encounter and experience wines. Because as a retailer, you're selling people the wine for consumption to enjoy. We're retailers, we're not wine producers. I have very little interested knowing about certain chemical aspects or technical aspects of wine production. And there is a whole kind of bend in American retail to sit there and talk about that stuff with the consumer. But think of what that word is, consumer. They're consuming. They want to experience the wine as how it is enjoyed with other things. So you want to be well versed in that. And our experience in discovering is mostly at restaurants. we'll go around and then we'll really discover a lot of great labels and producers at the restaurants. And then from there, we can source them out and get familiar with who's importing them.
That's great. Tell us a little more about the food side of the Good Mansion wines.
So the food side.
How did you get started? How did you get started, and so forth?
Certainly, and it's got another little random story that is just kind of the genesis of something successful. And in our idea, it was a great addition to the shop. Is that I wanted to import some olive oil that was very near and dear to me from the hometown of my mom's family in Italy, and I reached out to them, and I thought, to get their attention, I'm going to have to order, maybe like 4 or 5 dozen bottles, because I'll probably go through that in the course of the good shelf life of an olive oil, which is maybe about 18 months. So I thought, okay, I'll go ahead and order that. And then they were very interested. It was a very good olive oil. It had gotten a lot of good press in Italy. It was collaborative between basically a businessman, in some ways like myself. He was a veterinarian medicine distributor. He had a big distributor in Italy. He was basically had a lot of, he had some of the biggest circulation of veterinarian medicine and medical supplies in the country. At any rate, he had side ventured with olive grove growers, all people that had the groves, to produce a very good olive oil. Was getting a lot of good press, got 3 leaves in the Italian press, which is a kind of a definitive status, but nonetheless, we imported, we brought it in, and they asked us, you think about maybe importing this and selling this directly? And I thought, well, I've got a shop here and people have asked about some other products. I'd love to give it a try. Well, that was very, very successful. What I soon really realized is that when you have a wine shop, and with this back current of people commenting about, well, wouldn't cheeses be nice? Do you think you could carry some cheeses? There's no good cheeses in Wheeling. And then we put this olive oil out there, and it went like wildfire. People were really excited to kind of come across a very carefully procured imported product that basically was, unfortunately right now, Pete, a lot of the climate, when you hear the term, imported product, it's basically these industrial food chains that are, it'd be like someone from Italy importing a Reese's peanut butter cup. There's nothing particular about a lot of the imported Italian oils or whatever. They're all just industrial products. So nonetheless, customers were excited about it. Then I had a couple customers saying, "Oh, you need good balsamic." So I got hooked up with a broker in Rome. She was the consultant for the olive oil house, and she was familiar with a couple other producers because she basically promoted through her. She was a media consultant originally, and she promoted these companies. She worked with them as a media consultant, and she was familiar with a good balsamic house. So we brought in the balsamics. People love that. And then one thing led to the other, and she encouraged me to go. We, traveled around Italy together, and we visited a variety of producers. And when we went to the Milan, the food expo in Milan, which is one of the big food expos where all of these family businesses come, among others. There's some industry there, but there's mostly a lot of family enterprise, and really developed a huge portfolio. We now directly import from about 30 different producers. And these are guys that they're placed in all of the Michelin star restaurants and get the darlings of the Italian food press and the food press in the EU. And a lot of them have hardly any presence in the US. And a lot of it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is there's no volume. They can't meet the needs for huge importers. Some of them have grown to the point where their target is to go that route. And unfortunately, some of them now are on Amazon. We were the first or second US importer of these products 7 years ago or so. And now they're on Amazon. We've lost that rapport, and others have liked to stay small and focused. And so we have a huge variety of foods, Italian directly imported foods, as well as, like I said, the cheeses. We got involved in cheeses. Then we thought, well, we have to start bringing in cheeses. So we developed the back of our shop kitchen into a cheese and charcuterie. And that's only expanded. That's grown over the years. We did a big expansion in 2016, and we have all the full bakery, so on and so forth. Just one thing led to the other.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that on a couple occasions, because you can have a meal in your, and not it's limited space, but we were sitting next to people a couple times who came down from Pittsburgh, because
Yes.
Pittsburgh does not offer the selection of meats, cheeses, and wine that you do. And for them, it's well worth the hour drive. And I think that's quite a compliment to you.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. And it is significant to us. We always are very, very flattered every day when we have regular people from Pittsburgh that come down virtually every day of the week. Maybe not this time of the year with the way the weather has been, but most times of the year we have Pittsburgh customers that come down specifically to Wheeling to come to our shop. And it is because of a couple things in the Pennsylvania market is one, you have a state alcohol store state system for alcohol. State stores, which are not all bad, they do have a great selection at their premium selection stores, and some of their pricing is quite good. But the issue is that they're very rigid in their offerings. They somewhat repeat each other. There's not a lot of interesting accents in a lot of their selections when you go to certain stores, and the customer service lacks at these stores, and special ordering lacks. And in terms of European holdings, we really kind of are the premier wine shop in this whole region of the country. From arguably, we've been told by Columbus people there's nothing that compares in Columbus, and we haven't found anything out there. So we get customers from Columbus. We get customers from Cleveland that come down to Wheeling just for us. Not so regularly as the Pittsburghers, but maybe two or three times a year. Plenty of Pittsburgh customers, and it's such a factor in our business model now that if we didn't have that business, Pete, we wouldn't be in business. We are very dependent on the cash flow out of these markets. We're serving much larger than the Wheeling market, and we feel that we're a portal to Wheeling, like Ogilvy, like perhaps Wheeling Downs. We are a business that people come to Wheeling specifically for. And then from there, we lead them to other businesses.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for the economic development of the city, because there are times we really need it. I want to get to the food that you prepare, because it's nice to go in there and get the fresh baked goods. And tell us a little. And what time do you start in the morning? Because you've got to start baking that awfully early.
We do offer baked products each and every day. We're open 7 days a week, Monday to Sunday, certainly 9 to 7. So because we're open at 9, it depends on the time of the week and the time of the year. But generally, we're there anytime from as early as 5:30, but usually in the 6 o'clock hour is when we can come and we can get everything ready. We offer a whole repertoire of French breads, including baguettes, sourdoughs on most days, on some days, specialty breads, other breads. Classic French viennoiseries or pastries, all the classic French pastries, and the French desserts that Olivier makes, who, of course, he is French. He's a French citizen, native of France, and he puts out some extraordinary desserts. His work, because, there's not a freshness factor with desserts, they roll out throughout the day. He can really come in, at 8 or 9 and work all day. Bakers that are doing the breads and pastries, need to come in earlier.
Great. I always like to highlight entrepreneurs on this show. What advice do you have for someone not necessarily wanting to start a restaurant or a wine store, but just an entrepreneur in general? What kinds of things would you tell them?
Well, most definitely, I would say, first off, gosh darn it, bring something new to market. I mean, so many of the failed business models and struggling business models that you see are based in the Me Too. There's a whole Me Too aspect to the economy, that it's nice to be second to market or you see it succeed somewhere, but bring something new to market. Because as Henry Ford said, I think, to paraphrase him, the consumer doesn't know what they want, right? So many of the best businesses and products that have come is things that people don't realize that they wanted them. And that's kind of what Good Mansion Wines was all about, in the sense that even though people have said that they wanted this and that and so on and so forth, we really stuck our neck out a lot, bringing a whole model of business to Wheeling, a retail experience to Wheeling that nobody really knew that they wanted. But it's been very successful, and it's been so successful that it's actually our radial draw is much, much larger than Wheeling. So when you bring something new to market, you're telling you're bringing up a new product that's what kind of is a capitalist society is all about, is like enriching people with new experiences. The spice trade, look at the spice trade, back in the, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Nobody in Europe said, gosh, I really would like some cumin or turmeric, like that was like discovered there in the Far East, and it was brought to Europe, and they discovered they loved it. And so that's what really enriches an economy, and it allows an economy to grow. And if I could just use like a counter comparison, is like people love chicken wings. Well, then there's like 30 businesses, restaurants that have to have chicken wings because everybody, that's really unimpressive. I mean, that's not going to really do anything for bringing outside business into a market. When you bring something first to market, you're drawing from a larger radius. So my advice, first and foremost, is find something that is new. Bring something new to market. Put your signature on something. Be responsible for having brought something in new. Don't be a also ran. Don't be a me tooer, because that's a much safer space to be. Well, they've done this. This works. I'm going to start doing it. Well, you're not really enriching the community in that way. You're just,
Well, if you build it, they will come.
There's a little bit of that, yeah, and certainly do your research on it too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Don't be stupidly blind about it, but do some research. And it could be that it exists in another market really well, and it has no presence here, and that's something that you're enriching the community when you do that.
Well, that's great. I want to thank you very much for your time, and of course we'll be seeing each other. I have a feeling most of our viewers have been in your shop a couple times. And keep up the good work and the quality of the good work.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you. And yes, we are open today, and the snow, and whenever this runs, probably when this runs, it will be snowing, given the way the season has been, right? So we'll be open, come rain or sunshine, 7 days a week, 9 to 7. And thanks so much for having us on today.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank the viewers. We'll be seeing you all next week. I'm Pete Holloway for Hazlett, Bird & Watson.